Hey, everybody. Welcome to the latest installment of Virtru's Hash It Out series. These are informal chats that we have just covering kind of the latest topics and, things of interest for us in the industry, where we kind of give our thoughts and then we share them. And so today, you're joined by, of course, myself, Trevor Foskett. I am the Senior Director of Solutions Engineering here at Virtru, and I'm joined by my colleague, Litoff, who is our Senior Director of Customer Support. Aptly, because today's session is titled Move Fast, Stay Secure, Efficient Security for High-Performing Support Teams. So we're going to dive into what all that means. So Alex, thanks for being here today. I guess I'll start by saying, I think in our world, we tend to think about technology stacks that a lot of organizations have, and we think that the person who we want to talk to about that is the IT administrator, or maybe it's a security admin. But as the leader of our support function, you kind of have your own technology stack that you work off of and kind of manage yourself. So to start, can you kind of tell me a little about the tools that you and your team are using on a day-to-day basis and maybe how they're a little bit different than what the rest of us in the organization are using?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, excited to be here. A long time listener, first time caller. And so excited to dig in with you here, Trevor. I think that's a great place to start because the reality is there's some nuances of running a support team. And one of them is they live and breathe in a ticketing system. And so for us, that's Zendesk, but, Salesforce and Zendesk are two of the more popular ones, whether it's customer, some other type of tool. I mean, that's where they live and breathe. And we want to keep the teams in there as much as possible. And any other app or system we're using, we want it as tightly integrated as possible. Because when you start talking about hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of tickets, every click starts to add up over the course of days, weeks, months, years. And so, there's other tools in the mix. We got a billing system. Salesforce is our CRM, but as much of that as possible, we want integrated into our system. There's also the back end, but the support teams live and breathe out of that ticketing system. I mean, I can email my team and they won't see it for days. But if I put it in as a ticket, they'll see it in 2 minutes. And that's just the reality of running a support team. It's got to go into that queue. Things have to be tightly integrated there.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you mentioned there is that number of clicks adds up over, time. And once you get into these high volume ticketing systems, one thing that we hear a lot is, that's how these people are measured on the performance of their job is, ability to close tickets in a timely manner. And so anytime you're asking them to go somewhere else, that's, not just annoying and they're having to click more, but it could have, potential ramifications for how they, look to their management come, QBR time. Makes a ton of sense. So, it sounds like at Virtru, you mentioned we're using Zendesk. Any other tools that you guys have sort of in that environment, things that you've integrated into that environment, or is it all sort of purely run straight through Zendesk, natively, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, what I said before is the unfortunate reality is part of it's aspirational. Not everything is tightly integrated. For us, I think there's a couple really important pieces. We've got a Salesforce integration so we can see customer data right in the tickets. Then we also have our Virtru Secure Share app. So when we are handling sensitive information, sending user lists, HMAC tokens, or unique identifiers, we can quickly use that to share files, share that sensitive information securely with Virtru from right in Zendesk. And so, those are some of the types of things we're doing. The one piece for us that isn't integrated is some of our, like our homegrown backend applications we use to check the database to make sure stuff's not out of whack there or view certain user actions or streams. That's just the one piece that for security reasons and technical reasons isn't integrated. But for us, we tried really hard to get everything else in there. And, with security in mind, obviously, it's the data privacy and security company.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up an interesting point because I think a lot of people, when they think of, your customer support workflow, you're not really thinking, is this something that needs additional security or are there privacy implications? But you just mentioned a few right there where you guys are, talking back and forth with customers and sharing sensitive details about their accounts and their configurations. And obviously the configuration of a data-centric security tool like Virtru that they're using is, is in itself sensitive, right? Because it's part of their security posture. API keys, HMAC tokens you mentioned. And we hear this a lot from healthcare organizations too, that may be running a lot of their patient outreach through a platform like Zendesk, even though it's not directly support. It is designed for communicating with people who are outside your organization in an organized fashion. And so we hear, people just will send us their social security number or the list of symptoms they're having, or we need to share with them, their report details. And if we have to go outside of our environment, that introduces one, extra clicks, extra time, like you said, and two, anytime we're sort of deviating from our established workflow means we're kind of coming up with something else on the fly, which, the security admins are thinking, oh God, what are they doing when they're doing, something other than what they're supposed to do? Can you tell me a little bit about, what your process before some of those direct integrations were that you mentioned? You said we have some of Virtru's tools kind of baked in these days, but what did you guys have to do before that? How did you handle if you needed to send, say, a user list or, an account configuration to someone and we didn't have any sort of direct integration in the environment? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's another good question. And, for me, even pre-Virtru, this stuff wasn't on my radar. What did it look like? We just did it right in Zendesk or whatever our support tool was, right? I came out of that marketing space. And then when I came here, security went from something I had to, deal with occasionally to, oh, wow, I really have to get this right. Oh, wow, this is important. I've been a little naive earlier in my career. And so, for us, what previously would happen is like we had reps going to their individual inboxes and then, using our Virtru email plugin to toggle that on and mail the user list. But I think, as you just mentioned, that A, adds clicks, B, gets them out of the tool. And then they've got a thread outside of our ticketing system where now that customer can come back to that rep individually. And what if that rep's on vacation? What if they don't work here? What if a different team needs it? It's, now they're emailing a rep's inbox and all the checks and balances we have built into our support queue, all the automation, all the things designed to make sure that customer gets a good experience are now, we can't apply those. And so it really ties into that gear switching and, providing a good experience to customers. And for us, we had to find ways to stay secure just because of the company we are. But in other places, it's a little scarier. People are just sending it in the clear or, sharing the information without any protection or controls. And it's going to leave them open to, potential fines or, could lead to data getting in the wrong people's hands. And, unfortunately, the reality is support's already viewed by a lot of leaders, not all, as a cost center. And I don't believe it's a cost center, but because it doesn't directly own revenue, it's looked at that. And when you add this additional risk factor on top of that, I think it's enough to keep support leaders up at night of, I'm already viewed as a cost. And now I've got, potentially stuff being sent in the clear or things that could violate certain regulations. Like, that's scary.
Yeah. You mentioned one thing there that I thought was really, it was all interesting, of course. But one thing that really, I kind of picked up on was, I think it was interesting to me because of the fact that, we have a couple of integrations into Zendesk at Virtru that we obviously sell and provide to our customers. And in my capacity, given that they're new, I'm typically talking to people who already have Virtru elsewhere in their environment in some capacity. And so you mentioned, one of the options is let's go into our personal Gmail and send via Virtru there because we have that integration. That's what I hear a lot is, well, we have this process that kind of works, but it's slower. We'd like to make it better and have it more centrally located within our ticketing system. But the other one you mentioned, and I think given that this is a newer sort of product for us, is one that I haven't engaged with much yet, is that person who just says, we don't have a process. If we don't have a process that we'd like to make better, we just don't have one at all. And I think, that's really important to think about is if you don't have any sort of established process now, what are your agents sharing? What industry are you in? What compliances do you deal with? Could any of the things that get, incorporated into supporting your customers, whether it be logs or a financial statement or a password reset, any of these things, do we have a process in place for it other than just send it via email and hope it's okay? If so, maybe, as you said, something that should be keeping you up at night. And if you don't want to be up at night, maybe think about what else we can apply to maybe change that up and sort of shore up that security posture. So that's really interesting. And go ahead.
Yeah, if just to kind of build on that, the way I think about it, and if you are listening and you're starting from nowhere, I think there's a couple items to take into account. Number one is, what do my reps, and particularly if you have different types of reps, what do they need access to? I think there's this temptation to just give people access to things. And so, I'll give you an example. Like for us, does a third-party contractor need access to go in it and update accounts in our database? Well, that's probably not the most secure thing to give someone halfway around the world when we're subject to all these regulations and all this stuff, and that person's likely handling some lower level stuff. Why do they need the most advanced, sophisticated access? Why don't we reserve that for tenured reps and managers, right? They can go take those actions. Does the super technical person who's only dealing with certain things on a product, they really need access to all the billing data and credit card info on customers? And so segmenting your team and the access tools and provisioning in a way that makes sense and aligns with need is just a simple way to create a process that eliminates risk. And it starts before you even communicating, right? It's just a question of, does this person need access to this? And if not, then giving it to them is only a risk and not a positive. And so that's number one. And number two, because that's upstream of what we're talking about, which is actually sending the information, actually getting it to the customer. And then from there, it's about thinking about what's the right tool to do this securely. And we've talked a lot about having it tightly integrated with Zendesk. That's important, obviously. But you mentioned an example earlier of a healthcare company. If I didn't work at Virtru and I worked at a healthcare company and 90% of our tickets were about test results, I may not even try to embed the security in Zendesk. I might get like a Virtru gateway or some other similar tool that's just encrypting things going in and out of my environment rather than embedding something natively. Because I know 90% of my tickets are like HIPAA or, due to regulation, is going to be considered sensitive. So why am I making my reps worry about this at all? Why don't I just blanket protect things? Versus for us, we try not to handle more sensitive info than we need to. So that's where like our thing we were talking about earlier, our integrated Zendesk connector and application come in, because it lets us be a little more pointed. Okay, I need to share the security user list, but the rest of the conversation, there isn't really any PII or super sensitive, data being shared.
Right.
So it's about finding that right tool and, do I have reps have access to the right thing? And then, how often are they dealing with sensitive information, and what's the right tool for that? Is it a blanket solution? Is it something more pointed? And when you take those two pieces and combine those with just the regular security training, security awareness, that's where I think support leaders like me start to feel a lot more confident. Like, okay, my risk profile's been lowered significantly.
Sure. It sounds like there's a lot of things you're kind of juggling here. Some of it is tooling. Some of it is tooling, obviously, and selfishly, Virtru has some things that we can help with. We have our gateway, we have our secure share integration for sharing files sensitively inbound and outbound. But as with all, whether it's compliance or simply security postures, that's not just going to make you done. Right. There's other things to think about. There are configurations within your ticketing platform that will, determine who gets access to what ticket in the first place. If it's a billing question, it should go to this team. If it's not, it should go to that team. We're going to give you access to the back end systems to get those API keys. Well, if you're the billing admin, probably not. You don't need them. And so I think, as you kind of laid out, there's a lot of things to think about. If you're not thinking about them already, I would imagine most support leaders are thinking probably about a lot of this stuff, maybe not all of it. There is this whole sort of ecosystem going on almost in parallel or tangential to what those IT and security leaders are typically thinking about, which is all of our kind of business users who are in Office 365 or who are in Google Workspace or in, our AWS instance, whatever it is. But that sort of customer support world is where, you probably have most of your sort of communications going on with your customer base going outside of that corporate environment. So there's obviously a lot to think about there. And, I see the hairs turning gray on your head as we speak, Alex. I know you're thinking about it all the time. But you're doing a great job. I think, that this has covered a lot here. I guess, as maybe a final note, I would say, if you're someone who's listening to this and thinks, man, I'm not thinking about any of this. Well, what's your advice to that person who wants to maybe start thinking about this? It's a lot to kind of get on your plate at once. So what would be your sort of entry point to that journey? If you're day one, you've just joined Virtru, you're in charge of support, and they're not doing anything right. What's your first step there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, at a fundamental level, our job is speed and quality, right? And the balance of those two to deliver good customer experiences. So everything starts there. And when you talk about, okay, people aren't thinking about this security piece, but it's a little bit of what I think of as table stakes. You have to do it well enough to kind of play the game or check the box. Where I'd start with is just brush up a little bit on, the industry you are in and any regulations that apply to it from a data security standpoint. If you have an IT team, a CTO, particularly a security team, they'll likely know this stuff, and you can go ask them. And that's where it starts. That's going to be the least common denominator. Like we talked about healthcare, okay, so we know HIPAA is going to apply, and there's certain things we have to do. Okay, we're a financial organization, and these regulations apply to us or don't, versus I mean, Netflix, and, that all I might have is the, credit card info, but not much else, and passwords, not much else is really that sensitive we're dealing with. Does it really,
Well, I don't want anyone to find out how much, late night cooking shows I'm watching on Netflix. Alex, I wouldn't say it's, no sensitive data, but it's a little bit more based around your binging habits, I would say.
Exactly. But exactly. They'll say how much reality TV I watch. But anyway, in each of those scenarios, like we talked about earlier, finding the right tool for the job, finding that, least common secure denominator, that's where it's going to start. In some of those scenarios, like the HIPAA one where I'm delivering all those test results, yeah, I probably need a blanket solution. I probably need security baked into my ticketing tool. I need some additional stuff to make sure it's encrypted as it goes to customers end to end, because that's part or letter of the law. Whereas if I'm, in a different scenario, that may be a little less relevant. So it starts by just really understanding what applies to you, what doesn't, at a basic high level. And from there, then it comes into what we talked about earlier. Who needs access to what? What's the right tool for that job? And then layering on the ongoing security and awareness training that we all, as any employee, need to be taking and doing. And hopefully that part's led by someone else. So that part's not on support leaders, right? And it's really just about, okay, how do I make my ticketing tool meet those security and compliance needs without slowing us down, right? Because if it gets in the way, that's where we're back to the first part of this conversation. Ticket volume or ticket speed and efficiency are going down. Satisfaction usually follows because you're moving slower, and that's the stuff we have to avoid. And so it's really about, okay, just understand your industry, understand your customers and what applies to you, and pick the right tool for that job, restrict access, and you can, pretty confidently push forward and worry about the 75 million things we have to worry about as support leaders.
Yeah, not the simplest juggling act. We've got speed, quality, security, and compliance that all sort of, I think, have equal weight in this discussion. So, hats off to you, Alex, for managing it as well as you do. It is no small task. I think that wraps us up for today's session. So, for those of you just joining, you're late. Go back to the start. This has been the latest edition of Virtru's Hash It Out series, where we just kind of shoot the and talk about some of these technical concepts in a more casual way. Hopefully we'll see you for the next one. Thanks.